Ooh boy, you guys, welcome back to the Barley Studios. Now, as you can see here, are you inside my head? I don't know. I think you might be, or I might be a little bit loopy. Or my kids are asleep and I just don't want to make a lot of noise making new content. But I still want to get some stuff done here in the studio. What is this we have here? This is an amazing Flynn Sister Epoxy glow-in-the-dark Austin Powers swirl. Now, I call it Austin Powers swirl because that's what we're using this for in this project. And as you can see here, right here, this is what it looks like in its entirety. Now, this is under UV light, so it does add a little bit more shine to those colors than it usually would be. But this thing's turning out pretty nice. What do you think? Yeah, I agree. It's looking pretty baller. Now, we have a long ways to go before this Austin Powers Mojo Canister is done. Now, be aware, this video does run quite a bit longer than some of my other content. This video in its entirety runs about 49 minutes, but we're going to be doing some awesome work on these tumbler rings. Now, you may be asking, where are these awesome bracelets from? Yes, these are tumbler rings, tumbler sleeves from Dimensional Drinks. Their link will be found below, so if you're either a tumbler maker already or you're trying to get into it, these are the ones that we'll be using for this project. Now, these rings simply just slide over the end of the tumbler, and we're going to use these to create this awesome cup here. Now, what are we going to do with these here? We are going to go ahead and begin painting them, but what color should we paint them? I don't know. What do you think? How would you paint these? Now, as you can see here, there is a little bit of a texture on the sides of them. So some of them have a smooth side and some of them have a rough side. I'm going to go ahead and give you just a little bit of a close-up here of what these rings look like. Now, these are 3D printed items, so you can see the banding as the layers are printed, but they are really ultra fine. They really have a great texture, and I think that they are going to take paint very well. As we get into this painting process, just be aware this is the entirety of the painting for the rings and the metallic surface. Now, this is the first part of this portion of the design of this tumbler here. There will be a second or a third, fourth video of this project here to create specific parts of this project. So although you may see some things or some creations for this project, you can also take those videos in their own individual content entities, and you can watch them solo. So for instance, when we come in later, we'll create a topper, maybe we'll create like some LED lights, and a lot of my trophy items are trophies instead of just drinkable tumblers, but you can always pop a straw in there and take some sips out if you want to. Now, back to these rings here. Now, you can see they are really good quality. They are very dense, and they're very nice. Now, you can see that there is a little bit of a lip there of where the print is made. Now, that is not a bad thing, but you will notice later on in the painting process, you will see that lip as I begin to apply paint. And unless you're wanting to build up a lot of layers, that will always be visible. But from our situation, we could turn that into a weld line. So we'll kind of see where we want to take it there. There you can kind of see that line right there again. On the larger band there. I was very tempted to actually cut this larger band in half, but because of how brittle it possibly could be, I didn't want to risk it. I could also put a piece of a foam or a reinforced PVC pipe in the ring and then cut through that as well, which would reinforce it as I cut it, but I decided just to go with what they have here. Later on in some of the other projects that we have from this Dimensional Drink Happy Box that we got, Happy Mail, we will be doing some cutting into some of those items. So just be aware, you'll see some cutting on those 3D prints in the future. Now we're just going to use a small tray here. This is a little pie tray here. I love these little things. They're absolutely awesome. I really do enjoy those. They're very simple, very small, and I don't know, they're just good. They come in all sorts of flavors here. So here's our paint selection here. We're going to definitely go and begin with a cast iron. Yes, we're going to start with a cast iron from Folkart. Now, all of the paints that we're going to use here are Folkart, but I'm just showing that I also have a craft brand of gunmetal gray. The second color is gunmetal gray, and then the third color is sterling silver, just to give it that extra shine. Now, here is comparing it to the Winsor & Newton Galleria tomb paints. Now, these paints are very vibrant. I think that the Galleria Winsor & Newton is a little bit brighter, so I'll probably use that later on down the road after we add a little bit of rust texture, maybe a little bit of decay and grunge to it in its final stages of creation. I haven't used this cast iron in quite a long time, and as you can see, it was kind of hard to get out. So it's very cakey. It's not as flowing as it should be. I could always add a little bit of water to it, but we're just going to use it as it is. Now, we're going to be very generous with this, but I don't really want to paint the entirety of the inside of the band. It's really not needed, but I do want to make sure that I paint just the under edge of each ring. So you'll see I'll just paint just barely inside the ring. And the reason for which is, if for some reason there's ever a glare on the epoxy layers as we get to later stages of this design process, I don't want there to be a white glare on the epoxy, or you to be able to see up underneath any of these bands. They need to look like they're solid pieces of metal, which means that any kind of epoxy that goes between these would be the glass of the actual Mojo canister. So the canister is wrapped in a metal exoskeleton, as it were, like a canister, and then the epoxy, which is Flynn's sister epoxy, which is a super ultra dense, very, well, I wouldn't say very thick, but it's pretty thick, nice layer of glass-like epoxy. You'll get to that later. We'll see it later. Just be aware, if you're following this in the design playlist, it's on the way soon. So I do recommend that you watch these videos in their entirety in the playlist. I will link that playlist at the end of this video, so if you need to jump around or see some of the future videos, or even jump out to the previous video to see how we made that amazing swirl tumbler, then you can do so. We're just being very generous here. I'm also not trying to apply too much paint. I am going to go ahead and lay that onto my piece of just construction paper. And I don't want to apply too much paint to where, as this dries, that it would stick to the paper itself and rip paper up and leave some residue of the paper on the item itself. So we're just going to do very thin layers, and then I think I do about maybe 2 or 3 entire coats. I'm really trying to focus mainly on the edges of the rings. I need to darken those out quite a bit. And then once we get these darkened out with maybe 1 or 2 more of the same layer, so as I paint one ring, and then by the time I get to the other 2, and then back around to the first one, it's pretty much dried to a touch finish, and I can apply another layer, and so I'm ready to move on to the next color. The next color we are using is a gunmetal gray. This is also by Folkart. Let's stay with the same brand if we can for just the dexterity of the video here. Now, I did pour out quite a bit here. This is an older paint, so just be aware I didn't probably shake it up as much as I could, so I do a little bit of mixing with my brush as I'm painting this on. Now, anytime you paint a gunmetal or a sterling silver over a dark base, it really does allow it to pop as opposed to a white. So anytime you paint a metallic over a darker base, the metallics just becomes so much richer than what you had before. Now, in all reality, the gunmetal gray is probably not a necessity. I just really like to add a little bit of shine to this. I really want the metallic coverage over this item to have a lot of shine to it, so that depending on where you are in the room or how far you are from the item, then even if the sterling silver is really showing that darker color from below, it still does have a lot of shine. And we'll see that later on in the videos, and sometimes in the later process videos where we go to get some of the glamour shots with the halo lights and a lot of lighting from behind and things like that. You'll start to see a lot of glare from the halo light above. And that's really what I'm going for. I really want to go for that silver look of the canister. Here in a little bit when I get to later stages, I'll kind of post some pictures of the canister that we're trying to reference. And I say reference because I'm not trying to duplicate the actual working item from the movie. I want to add my own artistic spin to it, and that also doesn't lock me into having to do it a certain way. I can just add my spin to it and just incorporate different ways. So we have a lot of paint left over here, and a lot of metallics that I like to put into my artistic flair. I like to have them kind of very rustic. So because we are going to be sculpting some pieces out of Sculpey Original here shortly, and then we're going to bake those and then apply them to the actual tumbler to kind of bring it into a canister-like kind of shape and overall silhouette and look, I want to make sure that I can bring these into my style, and I want them to be slightly grungy. So the movie Austin Powers was produced years and years and years ago, right? I don't remember the actual year. I'm not going to look it up either. I don't really care. I just love the movies, and they're there. But as you can see, if I were to make this in my style, I would grunge it out quite a bit and not make it look so brand new and so shiny. Like it just came off the assembly line, or they just pulled Austin Powers Mojo out, and then it's all of a sudden right here, like, here it is. We're not going to do that. I want to apply a little bit of rust and dirt and rust to it, and just nastiness. We're going to cake in some rounds in later process videos, maybe some different painting and things like that when I apply some rust texture. I have made rust and metallic coverage videos in the past of how I like to paint those, and I'll probably do a simple video of that here as well. So I'll probably link that video to at the very end of this one, as well as the playlist itself. So if you want to see that 3-minute just condensed version of all of this down, then you can do so. I'm going to go ahead and hit this with a heat gun here on the low setting, so that way I do not melt my glove into my hand. And I'm also keeping my distance as well. I don't want to put too much heat onto the 3D bands so that they warp or bend or heat up too much. But we're just going to kind of give that acrylic paint just a little heat flare to kind of dry things out a little bit. All right, so what do you think so far, you guys? I think that it's looking absolutely spectacular. Now, we're going to hold off on the sterling silver. I decided instead of painting these separate, I wanted to go ahead and paint it on the actual tumbler itself. That way, if there's any kind of issues with me applying these to the 20-ounce skinny, then I can kind of repair that with the next paint layer. And I'm also going to paint the other layers of the clays that we apply. We're going to apply some Airdry clay as well as some Sculpey original baked clay. We're going to do 2 different types of clay in this project, and then we're also going to do a more advanced clay structure later in the series. So make sure you kind of check out that playlist again. As you can see here, I'm just trying to give you a close-up of what that overall metallic coverage looks like. You can really see the comparison to the white band on the inside, and it is looking really, really good. Really happy with how these turned out. Now, as you can see, as we zoom back out here, we're going to go ahead and get rid of the tin pan for a moment there, but of course we can always come back to those same colors and the same tin tray if we need to. You can also spritz a little bit of water in there and then cover it up with some saran wrap if you needed to come back to those same colors later without getting rid of all that paint. Alright, so now we're going to really think about how we're going to apply this to the tumbler itself. Now, these rings were sent to us in a Happy Mail box with a bunch of other designs from Dimensional Drinks. You can kind of see their handle there in the back of the focus there of the camera. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply these to this. Now, they're not designed for a 20-ounce skinny tumbler, but that's what I usually carry on hand. So what we're going to do is we applied quite a bit of a flood coat to the actual tumbler itself, and these things are going to be pretty tight. Now, I could go ahead and give them a really good sand down, and I could probably get them to fit nice and loosely to the actual item. But we're going to go ahead and make them as pretty tight, so that way I don't have to worry about them shifting or moving. And what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and mix up just the smallest amount of Flynn's sister fast set epoxy. Now, this is a part A, part B, 2-part epoxy. We're just going to mix just a 1-to-1 ratio, and then we'll get these applied to the actual project itself. So we'll grab a little messing cup here, and then we will get started, you guys. Of course, Flynn's sister fast set is in the little pink bottle here. Very, very girly. Very girly. And as you can see, make sure you follow your instructions on the very back of this. It actually does state that even the fast set does take probably about 72 hours to fully cure in its entirety. So just be aware, though, just because it's firm and the items aren't moving around does not mean that epoxy is completely cured, especially when it's sealed underneath a band like it is. I do give this around probably about 24 to 48 hours before I even begin the painting process, and even then it's not actually sealing the tops and the bottoms of the band. So just be aware of that. It's still drying. It's still going to get its air contact, and it's gonna cure the way it needs to. So here we are beginning with the top one. This one is going to have 2 bands across the top. These are going to be the smaller bands, and we're going to just take a little bit of epoxy there. This is the Flynn sister epoxy, and we're going to go ahead and ring that around the inside of the tumbler here, or the tumbler ring, better yet. Now we're going to slide that down. Now there is a little bit of a rippled band here where I applied that really thick flood coat. It's not visible to the eye, but it's visible to the physical item itself. Now I'm trying to push this down. I'm making a lot of grunting noises. I'm going to push it down so hard. But it is getting tough because I also have epoxy on my glove, and it's just getting messy. I could take that glove off, but then I get epoxy on my hands, and sometimes you just get those projects where you're just like, you just get frustrated, and you're just like, I'm under a time crunch. I got to get this done, and you get to where you're having to rush or something like that because it's a new process, or something's just not going the way you expect it to. I really didn't expect to get a lot of adhesive or epoxy on the tumbler itself as I applied these. I expected them just to kind of smoothly scroll down. As you can see, we had to use a separate stainless steel pint cup to pressure and push that down. And then once it's over that lip and the rim, I can bring that back up again pretty easily just by rotating it around and applying upper pressure. Now the epoxy is still very wet, so I'm not worried about that. However, if I had used an E6000 adhesive, then that E6000 adhesive would have been all over the outside of this tumbler. That would have been a significant problem. Not only would it probably add a kind of a caked film layer to the outside of the tumbler, but then I would have to probably come in later and maybe sand that. I want that crystal glass-like finish when I get done. And by using epoxy over epoxy and then coming in with epoxy later, then it'll all look like one layer of epoxy as long as I get the bubbles out. Whereas if I used a different type of adhesive like E6000, even if it's clear, then you may see some kind of film or debris-like texture behind the epoxy when you get up close. Now, I'm not saying it's not in the inner world. I will probably be using E6000 later on to apply some of the other rings. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just saying in this situation is I used the epoxy specifically so that I had epoxy on epoxy if things went wrong like this. It also creates a really good bond with this epoxy on epoxy attaching the rings. I do go ahead and push that ring up just a little bit there. Now I'm going to have a rubber-like gasket to the top of the tumbler. So between those two rings, we are going to have a black gasket. Now we're going to be adding more gaskets later to it just to give it a really canister-like texture. That way it's just not silver on the beautiful colored backgrounds. We are going to apply quite a bit of gaskets to this to make it look more so realistic. We'll get to that in later stages. Don't stress over that right now, but that process will reappear later, so just be aware that we'll be coming back to finish out that later. We're still a long ways from being done with this project. Now we're going to go ahead and apply this the same manner, so sit back and enjoy the background music as we go ahead and get this next band on before we jump into the next step of this amazing process. Alright you guys, so here we are again at the same problem. Now at this point I'm thinking to myself, man, I really should have sanded this down a little bit and maybe pre-fit them, but I did not do so. So I'm trying to push this down into the ring itself. And if you applied too much pressure to something that doesn't fit, naturally the weaker item, which is the plastic or the 3D print, would break. We're going to take the risk. And what we're going to do is I'm literally going to slam this down on the table. Still not making contact with the bottom of the tumbler. We're going to do it again. There we are. Now we're making good contact with the bottom of the tumbler. Now this means that the ring is absolutely flush with the bottom of the epoxy on the tumbler itself, which means that we have a completely flush bottom to this project. Just be aware, this is a trophy. This is not an actual drinking tumbler that you would want to take with you absolutely everywhere you go. I'm trying to make tumblers that are trophy worthy. I know that there was a guy in Nevada who bought one of my radioactive tumbler cups, and he actually just bought it to put in the Slimer, his Ghost Busters Slimer in his house. So the tumbler that I had made is simply a prop for inside his home. So it's very cool. So I'm really trying to branch into just trophies instead of just drinkable tumblers, but you could pop a straw into it and drink it if you want. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'll finger apply a little bit of resin between these two bands. This is going to lock in the distance between these two items and there will be no shifting. Not only that, I really want to try to create a little bit of a buildup in there so that when I come back with the gasket later, I don't have to use a ton of material to give a gasket-like finish. There's supposed to be a little bit of glass behind that gasket and between these two bands, so I just went ahead and applied a little bit of epoxy to that. Now I had so much epoxy caked onto the outside of this crystal-like finish from a Flynn Sister Epoxy that I went ahead and applied another layer. So this is just a very, I wouldn't say a thick, but it's a very medium density of flood coat here. So it's enough to move around easily with my fingers, but it's not enough to how should I say this? It's enough to give me a full coverage without it pulling in particular areas because there's not enough epoxy on the item itself, if that's a good description. I will also hit that with the heat gun there, as you can see, so that we do pop all of those micro bubbles and we're still getting that crystal-like finish. It is imperative that as I continuously add more layers to the middle of the tumbler here and the bottom, that it continuously builds up to a glass-like finish. There's supposed to be a thick layer of glass around these amazing swirled Mojo colors. Using just a paper towel here, I'm going to go ahead and remove as much of the epoxy from the outside bands as I can. No, it's not going to remove all of it, and it's just part of it. But it's not really necessarily going to hurt the painting process in the next portion of this video. So just be aware, I'm trying to get as much off as I can, but if I can't, then it's not the end of the world, you guys. There we go, getting all that off there, and then we can move on to the next step is after this is cured. Alright, so just getting the last of that off there. Now here is where we stand so far. I'm just simply stating that there is a little bit of a separation in the banding at the very top because I did put that close to the top rim. Then there is a little bit of separation there. That's completely okay. I'm not worried about that at all. We'll use a little bit of epoxy up there, and what we'll do is we're going to make a kind of a metallic topper to go on that in another video. So just be aware that we'll be doing some sculpt work, and then we'll probably come in with some more metallics to blend that top into the overall structure of the canister from below. You can see here that it's very glistening here, very thin layer of epoxy on that. It's really hard to get it all off, even with the paper towels, but you can see that that is on there right now, and that is completely okay. It's not going to hurt anything. I just want to show that that silver is really being brought to life by that epoxy, and you can really see where some of the portions of the metal are covered with a little thin layer of epoxy that's not coming up, and then some of it does not have that. Now this is really going to kind of cake onto the edges of those rings there, and it's going to lock it into place. And now the very bottom here is a little bit different here, you guys. It needs to look like it's the bottom cap to the canister. So we're going to have to do some work here. There's a large separation of the bottom ring because I didn't want it to go all the way up the portion of the tumbler and have that exposed. I wanted that to feel like the bottom of the canister. So we're going to do a little bit of clay work on that. We'll be using DOS Airdry clay for that part of the project there, and we'll be getting to that in the second half of this video, which we're about to roll into. But look at these colors, you guys. The greens, the oranges, the reds, the pinks, the purples, the blues. They are mixing in a symphony of colors, and they look absolutely awesome. If you want your own, make sure you go to johnbarlowstudios.com or Etsy to find yours. Now here we are in technical day number 2 of this portion of the video. You're still inside my head. Is that weird? Is that creepy? I don't know. Now here we are. This is where we are at so far. We still have that kind of gunmetal gray, cast iron darkness to it. We have not brightened that with any sterling silver yet. But as you can see from above, that glass-like finish on that epoxy layer, as well as the metallics themselves, they are shining in the light. We also have a little bit of buildup in between those two rings, and there was no caking on the bottom of the rings at all. We are going to get a little bit of a overpaint there. I'll do a little bit of cleanup work with my fingernail there. And we're also going to do the air dry clay on the very bottom to really finish out the bottom of the cup. What do you think, you guys? I think it's turning out pretty good. And I'm really excited to go ahead and get some paint on this as far as a silver, sterling silver Folkart color. Now we are also going to go ahead and apply a kind of a band down the tumbler there. Now, in a lot of the reference photos, which I will post in the bottom right here, you can see that there's an actual kind of a backing or a a top part to the canister itself when they are pulling the injection from Austin Powers there. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and apply that band to the back, and it's going to make it feel like more of a canister instead of just an amazing tumbler with rings on it, right? We want this to feel like a canister, and I'm going to say canister 1,000 times in this video, and it's worth it every time. So what I want to do is I want to create just a sculpted band that goes from the bottom here up to the top. Now the hardest part about this entire process is figuring out where I want to cover up this amazing color palette that we have on the under painting from the previous video here. This is a very hard choice, and you really have to pick out what colors and swirls you want to eliminate in this process. Now here I am just using my fingers to represent what I could possibly be covering up as I apply this clay banding here with the Sculpey original. And I don't know, you guys, this is a really tough choice here, and I do add a little bit of the content here, me just trying to dictate where I want to kind of cover things up here. And I finally do decide on a side, but even then, after I like put it off to the side and then come back to it after I get my little towel for just to keep it off the work surface here, I even then am like second guessing whether or not I want to cover up the part that I had chosen originally. So we're going to flip this little towel over here, and I think it's just an easy way of just showing that I'm trying to keep the tumbler from rolling around while also not applying too many scratches to my paint that I'm applying here. So again, trying to choose the side that I want to use here. It's really tough here, and I finally do choose one side in particular. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply just a nice layer of saran wrap to the exterior of this this tumbler here, and that's so that I don't get any kind of excessive clay powder or debris or oils on the actual surface of the tumbler. And because the item that we're creating right now will be baked, I was going to say created, but baked separately from this portion of the build, because we're going to apply direct heat to that to bake it in the oven. It's going to be applied separately afterwards. And I don't want to apply any more contaminants to the exterior of that epoxy and that item than I can avoid. Of course, I could come in with a paint, like a cleaner, or like a canvas cleaner, or like a nice soap to water mixture, and remove a lot of the contaminants that will get applied to the project. But we're going to try to go above and beyond to make sure that we don't apply anything extra that we don't need to. Now, as you can see, we've rolled out a piece of clay in the lasagna press there, and then right now I'm just getting a general flat shape on the sides that I can be kind of happy with. And then I'm going to just slowly blend this into the bottom and the top bands. So I'll slowly take away until I can just get not a perfect seam, but just a decent seam between the two pieces. Now I'm going to refer to these as two pieces of metal, because when I get done, they will all have the same overall texture. They will have the same paint, the same directional paint strokes, and all that stuff. So you'll see that all here shortly in this portion of the video. But you can see really now I'm just trying to get the overall distinct shape that I want. I also do add a second layer right here just to kind of extend that down even more, and I do trim it back even then after that. So just be aware that everything I'm adding now is going to change a little bit as we move through this process. Kind of making sure that the edge is a little bit straight there, and I do kind of trim that again here shortly towards later stages of this part. Adding a little bit more material there to kind of extend that over. I just decided to make that a little bit thicker, so that if you were to be looking at this item on the shelf at a little bit of a distance or at a different angle, then at least one side of that sculpted piece of metal plating would be visible from the side of the viewer. So I want to make sure that at least some part of that is visible from the other side, and that requires me to make the banding slightly thicker. Otherwise, I felt like just the banding was too thin. And like I said before, we're going to cut another sliver off the other side in a moment. But for the most part, I'm really happy with how thick it is. And I think it's going to look good when I start to apply a little bit of curvature to the corners as they meet those dimensional drinks. bands. So you'll see me kind of change the shape from a square, from a rectangle, into more of a designed canister transition from the side to the bands, if I described that accurately. Just using the wire weeding tool there, and I'm just kind of scraping a little bit of the material away, just trying to get a general straight edge there, so that I can kind of get an idea how it looks and whether or not I want to shrink it down or add more, and then keep on moving through the process here. Trust the process, right? Trust the process. I'm also trying to make sure that seam between the plate and the bands are not gone, but reduced. It's looking pretty good so far, you guys. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply 2 little squares to each corner of the plate as they're making contact with the bands. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a simple medicine cup here. I'm going to create a little impression there, and I'm just going to hand carve that into like a little crescent moon shape there. Now that is just going to kind of blend it into the base there, and then from the side that'll look like it's just like kind of metal banding that's holding the glass and reinforcing the glass into place, and it's going to look really cool. I really do think that it looks similar to the canister that they had as a movie prop, but like I said, it's in my style and my overall design here. Looking pretty good, you guys. Now I do trim that a little bit more there just to kind of get those 2 sides to look similar in a lot of ways. If they're not absolutely perfect, then I'm completely okay with that. We're going to fix it in other stages as we apply more rust and decay in the next video. Looking pretty good. Now we're going to cut the other side a little bit different here, just to show some diversity on how you could possibly cut these. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a ruler in a vertical fashion, and we're going to go ahead and cut it straight down, and then I will curve those into the bands. So a little bit different of a setup. I'm also trying to make sure that these don't have too much ridge there. The plastic wrap is kind of pushing up on those angles a little bit. There I am using the vertical fashion, just flattening that ruler onto the actual workstation there, and then just creating that overall straight edge that I need. And then what I'll do is I'll mark these just however I feel like it, and then I'll cut these out. There it is, cutting that shape out to fit to size. And then I'll kind of judge whether or not I need to take a little bit off here and there. Again, I kind of did that right hand side just by looking at it and just by freehand. And then the other side we did with the more so measuring with 2 pieces of clay and the measuring cup. Kind of smoothing the edges there a little bit. If it has a little bit of dinks and dings and chips and nicks, then that's okay too. I'm sure that's going to be a little bit of decay to it, because again, we're not making the newer version of this. We're going to make it a little bit decayed in my artistic style. Looking pretty good, you guys. Now at this point, this is almost ready for baking. We're going to just smooth it out a little bit here and there, and then we're going to go ahead and begin the bottom of the tumbler as this bakes. Now I go ahead and I just gently remove the plastic wrap, and we're going to lift the plastic wrap very painstakingly, actually, because it's very stuck to the outside of the cup. So I'm using an X-Acto knife and a little pair of scissors to try to get that kind of pulled up, and then we're going to lift that and put it onto this stainless steel 20-ounce blank, which is the same size as the project we're working on. Now this will go into the oven at 275, at least my conventional oven at 275, and then I just kind of freeball it. I probably do about, I'd say, 15 to 20 minutes or so. No, I'm not really big on time. It depends on how thick the item is, depends on how long I give it in the oven. Sometimes I forget about an item, have to go get it, and it's a little bit more chalky than it usually is, or sometimes if nothing else, just don't underbake it, and then just don't burn it. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Alright, you guys, so at this point, with that in the oven and out of the way, we're going to go ahead and begin the work on the bottom of the tumbler here. Now, as you can see, we have a bit of a gap there. Now, those are still beautiful colors, but we're going to have to cover them up. Now, I have used this DOS Airdry pack before, and it's a little bit dried out, so I kind of have to pinch and pull little pieces off, and we're going to go ahead and apply just a nice general push into that groove there, and we're going to completely eliminate that groove. What we'll do is we'll fill in the groove, we'll smooth it, then we'll kind of build up the overall texture on the bottom into a ring-like shape before we apply any kind of metal striations to the bottom of the canister here. So sit back and enjoy as we go ahead and apply all of this DOS air dry clay, which is the second type of clay that we're using on this project, into this cup bottom to make it look more like an actual metallic canister. Sit back and enjoy. And here we are in its entirety. There we are with the complete band across the bottom. And I do a little bit more cleanup work right there, just trying to get a little bit of that cleaned off there on the bottom. There's a little bit of an air dry film there. And as that dries out, then we can kind of really detail that with some paints here a little bit, and it'll kind of transform the way it overall looks. The bottom of the tumbler turned out quite dark, but it's really nice. Now here we are with the actual metal plate for the side, and this is fully cured, and I did bake it with the actual plastic wrap on there as well, which doesn't really hurt it or anything like that, but just be aware that it is just pulling right off like that. Kind of destroyed it and baked it into oblivion there. You will also notice that I did not go out of my way to make sure that the bottom of this plate is smooth. I don't really think there's no need for that. It's going to be glued down, and if anything else, it applies a place for the glue to settle into and to keep it from kind of warping or bending or moving around too much underneath the clay. Now here we are, I'm just showing you that I'm using the edge of my finger there, and I can kind of clean up the under edge of the lip of that air dry clay as that kind of cures and dries out. But overall, you can really still see some of the nice, beautiful blues and greens, and a little bit of the darker colors popping through the bottom of the canister there. It'll bring a little bit of that color to life when I start to paint that. Now we're going to do a little bit of trim work here before we apply this to the actual side of the tumbler here. trying to trim that up a little bit, kind of keep the clay so where it looks like it's metallic and it's coming down to make contact with those bands there. Alright, now I'm really having to pick that space that I wanted, and I've actually sculpted it so it only really fits right there where I had originally planned. We're going to use E6000 clear to apply this to the actual side of the tumbler, and then what we'll do is we'll apply a few rubber bands to hold it in place. They really don't apply too much pressure to it, just to, like, you know, squeeze out the glue, but they do keep it from moving around so much to where I can do some work while they're kind of curing up there. There is a little bit of glue that is squeezed out of the edges, but I kind of really tried to gauge it so that that would not happen, and it wouldn't create that film, that adhesive film over the epoxy as we apply more layers, as I spoke of earlier. Just using a few rubber bands there just to hold it in place. I think I used a total of 3 or 4. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and remove those bands here in a few moments, but before we do that, we're going to go ahead and take the time to go ahead and detail paint the bottom of the tumbler here. Now, as you can see, the DOS air dry clay is completely cured to perfection, and it's probably cured in about, I'd say, 24 hours or so. So again, just remember that we're doing this in multiple days. We're not doing this all at one time, and that really allows us to give time to really think about how the project is going to turn out overall. Now, I do have a lot of this already inside my head, but that doesn't mean that I don't improvise and change things up as processes or things that I have don't work out. We're going to go ahead and apply the same overall layers that we had applied previously when we painted the rings themselves from Dimensional Drinks. And we're going to go ahead and begin with the cast iron from Folkart. I don't know if Folkart has a YouTube channel, but I have not been able to find them. So if you do know of Folkart's YouTube channel, make sure they are tagged below in the comments for me, you guys. If you've made it this far in the video, make sure you leave in the comment below what you think about this project so far. And whether or not you were able to get to the playlist, which will be linked at the very end of this video here. So there we are, letting that dry there, and then we're going to roll in with a kind of a detailed layer of the Folkart gunmetal gray. And that is before we actually roll into the silvers. Yes, I know we're so excited to get into the sterling silver, and we're going to apply such a great shine to the exterior of this project, but we're not there yet, guys. We're getting very, very close. So I know the anticipation is growing for that silver look that you see in the amazing thumbnail for this video, and we're getting close. Do not worry, we're getting there. As you can see there, the band across the bottom of the canister there, it really kind of closes it up, makes it look really kind of uniform, and really kind of finalizes the way that bottom of that canister looks. It's really starting to come along, you guys, and it's really starting to look like a canister. It's such a small item, but you have to really think about how much work and time goes into just building even something just like this. It's quite a bit. Same cast iron from Folkart. We're going to go ahead and apply a few layers to this. Now this is because I've smoothed this Sculpey original out, so it does have a little bit of trouble like holding the paint. But as we build up more layers of the same paint, which is the cast iron, it really starts to hold it pretty thickly, and it turns out pretty good overall. This is a total of, I think, 2 or 3 good layers, and this second layer by itself is a very liberal application of the cast iron there. So we're going to go ahead and apply that. And as I stated earlier, that's a little bit of a thicker paint because it's a little bit older. I haven't used it in a while, but I'm really kind of caking that on with a flat brush there. I will also use that in a smaller brush just to kind of get along the edges of the plate there to make sure that the edges are painted. And that's the same thing that we did for the rings themselves. I'm also caking it onto the edges, so the seam between the plate and the rings, I'm also very, very much so applying a lot of paint to that seam just to kind of blend it out a little bit. If you see it a little bit, that's completely okay. As we get to later stages in other videos, I will come in, we're going to apply a little bit of a rust texture with different mediums, which I have covered in the tips and tricks videos before, to give it a nice rustic, grunged, decayed texture. So I plan to bring a little bit of that divide between the plates and the rings back in the future videos. So if you see them, that's intentional. It's not a big deal. Here we are so far with this cast iron and the gunmetal gray. You can see it really does have a great shine, and it looks good overall, right? It looks good dinged out the way that it is, and these paints are just kind of curing up as I'm taking these awesome little glamour shots. Now we are beginning the sterling silver. Now you can use any silver that you want. I like sterling just because it's even more so a little bit brighter than some of the other silvers that they have. And I really think the shine level on this is next level. So we're going to go ahead and apply a kind of a brushed texture of this. I want to kind of keep my brush strokes all in the same direction, which is horizontal to the actual length of the tumbler there. And now we're going to continue that horizontal brush stroke onto the actual plate itself. Here we go. You can see we're working our way up the plate, and as we go, it's going to apply more and more shine to the project. Now I have my halo light above us quite a bit high in the air, so there's not an unbearable amount of glare there, but you can really see it though. I really want the shine from any kind of external light sources to be visible in the metallic surface, and then that's my overall goal. Now the prop that they had used in the movie, if I recall, is an absolute silver. And I don't know if they use like a chrome or something like that. It looks like a chrome to me, or just a high glare of a singular type of metal instead of like a brushed metal that we're doing here, just to give it a lot of depth and a lot of like just accents and deep color behind the actual silver. So as you can see, you can really still see the dark strokes from the other colors behind this brilliant, beautiful Folkart sterling silver. Don't forget to paint the edges of the actual metal plate there. Now we're doing all of this in these stages now, so that when we apply more epoxy layers in the future, as those build up, these are already painted and they're visible through the edges of the epoxy, which are supposed to represent the glass of the encapsulated item here. And we will also more than likely come in with a gasket along these. There will probably be a small gasket, but we'll get to that later. At the very end of this video, as we roll into the credits and to the other kind of linked videos, make sure you subscribe, by the way, before we get to that, then you'll kind of get a highlight clip of me applying one of those gaskets to the top bands there. Just being very nitpicky, I'm trying to apply a little bit more of that sterling silver to the top parts of those bands, just because when it's standing vertical on a shelf or something, I want those to have even more of a shine than the lower parts of the band, just so that they naturally have a little bit more of a brighter tone there. But as you can see here, the bands and the overall item is really transforming. Even normally you would think that the darker the external colors, those bright colors on the actual tumbler itself that are supposed to be the Mojo, would be even more accented and brighter, but that's not the case, or at least it doesn't feel like to me. I feel like the brighter the metallics come up to a high silver, or a pure not titanium white, more of a titanium metallic, or a sterling silver pure, or even the Winsor and Newton silver, then I feel like those colors in the background even being more and more accented by the silver surrounding them. Is that just me, guys, or is it just that the overall item, the overall tone, and it's just becoming brighter because it doesn't have that cast iron gunmetal gray color? Leave it in the comments below. Do you feel like the silver accented the colors more than the cast iron gunmetal gray color? I really do believe that it did, and I think that it makes it feel like the colors are brighter, even though the darker colors surrounding it, making the colors pop, would normally be the case. Leave in the comments below, guys, which do you think it looks better with, silver or a darker cast iron? Here we are as of right now at the end of this video here, guys. Now this is just one part of the project. We're going to move on to the next part. In the next video, we're going to be working on actually applying a few more layers of epoxy to the external glass, as well as maybe a cup topper. So I think I'll roll into the cup topper next before we actually roll into the side. Or who knows, maybe I'll do it all in one video and we'll see how it goes. I would like to make it to where I don't have to put any screws in the project, but because this is a trophy, who knows where I'll take it. I will decide when I get to that stage of this project. I do know that I want to introduce some LEDs into this, so we will be probably creating the kind of the syringe-like LEDs that go on the top of the canister as the Mojo is being extracted, which I will post that above to the right hand side. Now here we are at the very end of this portion of the project series. Now again, I really do hope y'all enjoyed me sculpting and painting all of these in metallics and the dimensional drink bands. And we will go into the next video, which will be us creating the topper as well as maybe some LED canisters to go on the side.